There is a strange truth about people who enjoy being alone. They were not born that way. They did not naturally feel comfortable disappearing from the crowd or choosing an empty room as the most peaceful place to be. Most people believe this is just introversion, but the truth goes deeper than that. This tendency is not just a personality trait. It is a survival pattern, a pattern that begins very early from a kind of childhood that teaches them to turn inward before they can reach out to anyone else. Over time, being alone no longer feels like loneliness. It becomes the safest shelter they have. So, what kind of childhood did they go through that made being alone become the shield that protects them in the present? Welcome back to Apex. In this video, we will break down 6 hidden psychological traces from childhood that explain why some people feel safer alone than they do around other people. Watch until the end because you may realize that the silence you have carried for so long has a completely different meaning. Trace 1, insecure attachment. When a child feels scared, their instinct is to run straight to their caregiver. In an ideal environment, the adult opens their arms and comforts them. When this comfort happens consistently, the child's brain forms a belief. The world is safe. People can be trusted. But what happens when that cycle is broken? What if the adult's response becomes a series of unpredictable reactions? Your childhood passed by in uncertainty. Some days your parents were cheerful, warm, and made you feel deeply loved. But on other days they became distant, cold, irritable, or ignored you for no reason. Yesterday, spilling a glass of water was just a funny little accident. Today, the same action gets you a full-blown storm. You never knew which version of them you were going to get that day. You had to constantly read the adults' faces. When this condition goes on for too long, your young brain is forced to draw a conclusion in order to protect itself. Connection is a risk. In psychology, this is called then insecure attachment style. When love comes with unpredictability, you lose the instinct to run toward others for protection. You begin to step back, not because you hate people, but because placing your trust in someone who can change their attitude at any moment feels too dangerous. As you grow up, this shapes the entire way you function in relationships. You can still communicate well and work effectively, but deep down you always keep an invisible distance. You set an unspoken boundary that absolutely no one is allowed to cross. And you feel most at peace when you are alone. Why? Because solitude gives you the thing your childhood longed for: stability. Solitude does not suddenly change its attitude. It never breaks its promises. When you are alone, you are in full control. That silence is not an escape from the world, but the only consistency your brain knows it can trust. Trace 2, invisible emotions. Some childhood wounds do not come with beatings or explosive arguments. They are much more subtle. They come from empty spaces, more specifically from the absence of understanding. In psychology, this is an extremely quiet wound called childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. Unlike abuse, CEN is not about what adults did to you, but about what they did not do. Your family may have been well off. You may have had enough food, warm clothes, and gone to a top school. From the outside, you had a perfect childhood, but in the emotional world, you were an orphan. It happens through very small moments. When you cried because of something unfair at school, the adults brushed it off. You're crying over that? Stop it right now. When you tried to explain your fear, you got a dismissive wave of the hand. What does a kid even know about worrying? When you brought home an achievement, excited to show it off, all you got was a half-hearted nod. Your emotions existed, but they were never fully seen or validated. So, what is the result? A child cannot give up on their parents, so they have to give up on their own needs instead. At some point, your brain decides to turn off the expression switch. You stop explaining. You stop crying in front of other people. You stop expecting someone to listen and truly care. You create a new survival rule for yourself. Every emotion must be digested inside. Look at the way you live now. When you face crushing pressure at work or a breakup, your first instinct is definitely not to find a shoulder to cry on. Your instinct is to pull away. You shut your bedroom door, analyze the problem by yourself, sit with the pain by yourself, and create a plan to get through it alone. Even when someone checks on you, your automatic answer is always, "I'm fine." From the outside, people may judge you as cold or arrogant, but they do not know that you withdraw because in the past, you learned a bitter lesson. When you brought your emotions into the light, all you got back was indifference. For you, Being alone means no one can deny what you are feeling. In that quiet space, you are allowed to be weak without having to explain yourself to anyone. Trace 3. Being forced to become emotionally independent too early. Modern society always praises independence. People see it as a wonderful quality, proof of maturity and strength. But for many people who like being alone, their independence is not a medal. It is a scar. It does not come from choice, but from a cruel force of circumstance. In psychology, this is called parentification or role reversal, sometimes known as the caregiving child. This happens when a child is forced to play the role of an adult before they have even had the chance to grow up. Maybe it happened because your family was struggling or your parents were too busy. Maybe one of your parents was emotionally fragile, had an illness, or there was constant conflict at home. In that lack of support, you were unconsciously pushed into becoming the problem solver. You had to take care of your younger siblings. You had to calm yourself down when you cried. You had to handle things on your own that a child should never have had to worry about. And the worst part is, adults praised you for being so mature. This kid is so good, so independent from such a young age, never makes the parents worry. That praise accidentally became a trap. The hidden message your brain absorbed was my value comes from not being a burden to anyone. I am not allowed to need help. From there, a core belief was formed. Asking others for help is a burden. When you grow up, this forced independence turns into hyper-independence. You are excellent at work. You manage your life perfectly, but deep underneath that outer shell is an extreme fear of dependence. You would rather stay up all night working yourself to exhaustion than open your mouth and ask for help, because asking means the risk of being rejected or the risk that someone else will mess things up. For you, being alone brings a feeling of power and absolute safety. When you do not depend on anyone, no one can disappoint you. The empty room is the only place where you can take off the perfect mask and simply exist. Trace 4, an overstimulating living space. To understand more deeply why we choose isolation, let's look at it from the angle of the physical environment. For a child, home is supposed to be the most peaceful place. But for you, it was the place where your senses were seriously overloaded. If you grew up in a family where the living space always felt suffocating, cramped, lacking basic privacy, or constantly filled with noise, from the TV blasting too loudly, adults yelling to sudden explosive arguments. To protect itself, your brain had to work at full capacity from a very young age just to filter out all that noise. You held your breath, listening to every heavy or light footstep, and flinched at the sound of doors slamming shut. That high stimulation environment reshaped your nervous system, keeping it in a constant state of red alert and making it run out of energy extremely fast by adulthood. This explains why you become drained so quickly after normal social situations. Being in a crowd where there are too many mixed sounds, lights, and overlapping conversations feels like a direct attack on a nervous system that has already been fragile since childhood. People often tell you, go out and hang with people. It'll help you feel better. They do not understand that for you going out is not a release. It is a drain. When you have to constantly endure mixed noises, tense energy around you, your body automatically activates the same stress state you lived in back in that noisy house from long ago. At that point, the empty room is not a hiding place. It is actually a biological charging station. Being alone means there is no more noise, no more outside stimulation. Absolute silence is the only medicine that helps activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate slows down, your muscles relax, and your mind recovers. For you, solitude is a biological need required for survival. Trace 5, a highly empathic instinct or HSP. Unlike the previous trace which comes from the environment, this preference for being alone comes from your own inborn biological structure. In psychology, this concept is called HSP or highly sensitive person, and it makes up about 15 to 20% of the population. If an average person experiences life in standard definition, an HSP child experiences the world in ultra-high definition. You do not just hear sound, you feel its frequency. And most importantly, you are like a sponge that absorbs other people's emotional energy. When you were little, even when no one said anything, you could still automatically sense the heavy atmosphere between your parents. Your chest felt heavy when you saw a classmate crying, or you felt extremely uneasy when standing in a room full of fake smiles. Because you did not have a protective filter separating the self from the world, you unconsciously carried all the negative energy around you. If you grew up in an environment that lacked understanding, you were constantly labeled weak, a crybaby, or too sensitive. To survive the flood of emotions pouring into your mind every day, an HSP child has only one defense mechanism: reduce contact and actively create protective bubbles of isolation. This creates a very common pattern in adulthood. You may communicate very well, have extremely high empathy, and be a wonderful emotional support for your friends. But right after that, you fall into a state of social hangover. You feel a strong need to disappear immediately. You separate yourself not because you hate people, but because your mental capacity has hit 100% overload after absorbing too much outside energy. Solitude at that point becomes a process of emotional cleansing. It helps you wring out your sponge, redraw the boundary between yourself and the world, and protect the wholeness of your mind. Trace 6, transactional love or the burden of conditional love. Try to remember, was your childhood always full of praise? You were an excellent student, a well-behaved child, the pride of the whole family. From the outside, you looked like the perfect model. But deep inside, your brain quietly recorded a very cruel rule. Love is not something freely given. It is a kind of transaction. You realize that adults only smiled when you brought home an A. They only hugged you when you behaved perfectly in front of guests. But the moment you failed, made a mistake, or showed weakness, that warmth disappeared instantly, replaced by disappointed sighs or terrifying coldness. The love you received came with one core condition. You had to always be excellent, or at least you had to always be useful. So, what is the result of this training? It turns you into an adult with people-pleasing tendencies. In your subconscious mind, the presence of other people equals a stage. When people are around, you automatically flip on your performance switch. You tense up to scan what they need, guess what they want to hear, and force yourself to play a perfect role so no one will judge you or leave you. And that is the real reason you crave being alone. Being alone is not because you hate people. Being alone is the only moment of the day when you are allowed to step down from the stage. The empty room is the only place where you are allowed to turn off the switch. In that solitude, no one demands that you be perfect. No one takes back their love, just because you are tired. For the first time, you are allowed to breathe, allowed to be a mess, and allowed to simply be yourself. When we place all 6 traces side by side, insecure attachment, invisible emotions, forced independence, nervous system overload, high sensitivity, and transactional love, a completely new picture begins to appear. It breaks the labels of introverted or hard to approach that society casually puts on you. The truth is, you were not born wanting to push the world away. You adapted into someone like that because at some point in the past was being alone gave you absolute safety. It was safer than being ignored, safer than being misunderstood, safer than hoping for something only to end up disappointed again. Your mind did something incredibly brilliant. It protected you, and that is something you need to acknowledge in yourself. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You have not lost the ability to love or connect. You are simply someone who had to learn how to survive emotionally without any support system other than yourself. That kind of independence takes extraordinary strength. But here's the trade-off. The shield that once protected you from pain in the past has now become the wall that keeps you from receiving good things in the present. When you build a system where you do not need anyone, you also accidentally take away the chance for truly sincere people to enter your life. When you lock the door tightly to keep out the storms, you may also end up blocking the sunlight. So the most important question right now is not why do I like being alone? The real question you need to ask yourself is, am I choosing to be alone or am I defaulting to being alone? These two ideas create very different lives. Choice brings a sense of freedom, peace, and control. Default is a conditioned reflex. It happens automatically unconsciously and is often driven by fear. The purpose of this video is not to tell you to immediately throw open the windows, run into the street, and become friends with everyone. Silence is still a beautiful gift for you. It is where you recharge, where you find clarity, and where you feel most true to yourself. That does not need to change. The purpose of this video is to give you awareness. When you understand the roots of your behaviors, you take back control. You begin to recognize when you are pulling away because you truly need rest, and when you are hiding simply because your subconscious is setting off a false alarm. You deserve peaceful moments of silence, but you also fully deserve relationships where you do not have to shrink yourself. You deserve people who make connection feel like a source of strength, not a burden you have to carry. If understanding these childhood patterns helped you find a new perspective on yourself through this video, do not forget to hit like and subscribe so we can keep exploring the deeper mysteries of the human mind together. And before you leave, look back at the long road your inner child has walked. Out of the 6 traces we discussed today, which one left the deepest scar in your childhood? Share your story in the comments because here, your silence is always heard. Thank you for staying with Apex. Goodbye and see you again.